Hello, this is Japanese Economic Review Channel. Today we're going to dive into the latest numbers from the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, all about Japan's huge service sector. The November 2025 data gives us a really vital snapshot of an industry that, makes up more than half of the entire Japanese economy. So yeah, it's a pretty big deal.
So, the big question on everyone's mind has to be this. Just how healthy is Japan's service economy, really? As we look at the end-of-year data, the numbers give us a pretty interesting and, I've got to say, a slightly complicated answer.
And here it is, the headline figure. The seasonally adjusted Tertiary Industry Index fell by 0.2% in November compared to the month before. Now you might be thinking, 0.2%? That's not much. And you're right, it's not a huge drop, but it is the first time we've seen a decline in 2 months, so it's definitely worth paying attention to. But believe me, this tiny number is hiding a much more dramatic story.
And that's because once you look just beneath that surface number, you see this massive split. It's like a tale of two economies. What's happening with services for consumers and what's happening with services for businesses, well, they're telling two completely different stories.
The difference is honestly night and day. On one side, services for you and me, the consumers, actually grew by 0.5%. People were out spending. But then you look at the other side, services for businesses, and they fell by 0.7%. You can almost feel the caution there, right? So you have this tug of war. Consumers are pulling things up, but businesses are pulling things down. And that tension is exactly why we ended up with that small negative number overall.
So, what specific industries are behind all this pushing and pulling? Let's get into the nitty-gritty and see which sectors had the biggest impact this month.
Okay, on the downside, there were 3 main culprits dragging the index down. The biggest weight came from wholesale trade, which dropped a pretty significant 3.2%, especially in machinery. Next up was finance and insurance, down 2.2%. And finally, transport and postal activities fell 1.2%, mostly because of a drop in road freight. You see the pattern, right? These are all heavily business-focused sectors, which totally backs up the story we just saw.
But hey, it wasn't all bad news. Not by a long shot. On the positive side, we saw some really strong growth in very consumer-focused areas. Living and amusement-related services jumped 1.8%. Think people spending more at amusement parks and restaurants. Medical and welfare services also had a healthy 0.7% increase. And retail trade was up 0.8%. This is that consumer strength in action, right there. This really shows you exactly why the whole index tipped into negative territory. That 3.2% drop in wholesale trade was just a much heavier weight than the 1.8% gain from amusement services could lift. At the end of the day, the weakness in the business sector was just too much for the strength in the consumer sector to overcome this time around.
Now, 1 month of data can always be a bit jumpy, so let's do what we always do and zoom out, see how this one little piece fits into the much bigger picture, the long-term trend.
And when we take that step back and look at the trend over the last several years, the story really changes. Yes, November was a dip. But the overall path for Japan's service sector has been a gradual, even if it's been a bumpy, recovery. We're still well above the levels we were seeing back in 2021 and 2022.
And hey, don't just take our word for it. This view is pretty much exactly what the ministry said in their official assessment. They state that, on the whole, tertiary industry activity is showing signs of picking up, although some weaknesses are seen. That just hits the nail on the head, doesn't it? It perfectly captures that feeling of a bumpy but ongoing recovery.
So what's the final word from this latest report? If you have to boil it all down to just one idea, it's this. We're looking at an uneven recovery. Let's just recap the story in 3 quick steps. First, the headline index took a small dip, but that hid what was really going on. Second, there was a clear divide. Strong consumer spending was fighting against weakness and caution in business-to-business sectors. And third, despite this monthly wobble, the bigger picture still points towards a slow but steady recovery for Japan's service economy.
So this leaves us with a really critical question for the next few months. As Japan's recovery keeps going, will businesses finally gain some confidence and catch up to consumers, closing this gap? Or is that caution from the business world eventually going to start weighing down consumer spending? That's the key dynamic we'll be watching in the next report.
Thank you for watching the Japanese Economic Review. We look forward to having you with us again.